I and Thou was a 1923 work of philosophical theology by the Austrian-Israeli author Martin Buber. Buber was born into a Jewish Viennese family in 1878 and was distantly related to Karl Marx. After experiencing a religious crisis in early adulthood, he undertook a formal study of philosophy. He became a Zionist in 1898, although he believed in a binational state of Israel where Jews would not dominate. In 1938, after the triumph of Nazism, he moved to Jerusalem and became a professor at the Hebrew University. He died in 1965 at the age of 87. I described I and Thou as a work of philosophical theology, but I might equally well have called it a mystical religious work. Buber was heavily influenced by Hasidism, a Jewish revivalist movement founded by a Polish-Ukrainian mystic called Israel ben Eliezer in the 18th century. The word Hasidism means something like piety. It emphasized devakot, literally clinging to God, a perpetual direct connection with God achievable through prayer, meditation, and Bible study. But Buber was also influenced by Kant, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, although he didn't agree with any of them. Superficially, I and Thou is a simple work, but its structure makes it difficult to analyse. It consists of 3 parts, each containing a small number of long or short essays, occasionally short enough to be little more than remarks, which are sometimes interrelated, sometimes not. None of the 3 parts has a title, and none of the blocks of text beneath it is either numbered or named. There are 2 English translations of a little over 100 pages, but one can finish it with the impression that the author has simply said the same thing over and over again, albeit in different ways. Which may be true, and it may not be a weakness, but there's very little argument. It's written in a deliberately poetic style designed to resist rational analysis. Its central claim appears in the first section of the first part, and it runs roughly like this. The attitude of man is twofold, in accordance with the twofold nature of the primary words he speaks. The primary words are not isolated, but combined. The first is the combination I-thou. The second is the combination I-it, in which, without a significant change of meaning, one of the words he and she can replace it. Hence, the I of man is also twofold, for the I of the primary word I-thou is a different I from that of the primary word I-it. In other words, there are 2 ways in which humans relate to the world. The first is person to person. I relate to you not as a thing, but as a self, in all important respects resembling me, far more than any piece of inanimate matter. The second is person to object. I relate to everything else in the world as an it, even other people sometimes. The word he or she can stand in for it when I'm talking objectively about someone, or relating impersonally to them. For Buber, only the I-thou relationship is really meaningful, although he accepts that we could not live without I-it relationships, because I-it relationships are the basis of all science and technology. There's a hint here that he sees this insight as a credible basis for a reconstruction of society, but he doesn't labour the point. In any case, not only are I-thou relationships the only meaningful ones, but they're all implicit forms of the ultimate I-thou relationship, the one with God. In each thou, as he puts it, we address the eternal thou. Human-to-human I-thou relationships give us a glimpse of God. They mediate God, but they're inherently unsustainable. They're always destined in the end to collapse into I-it relationships. Only one thou, Buber says, never ceases by its nature to be a thou for us. Arguably, this leads him into philosophical trouble. He thinks the problem with modern religious belief is that it reduces God to an it. People want to know whether God exists in the same way planets exist, and then what God's qualities are, and so on. But this replaces the sole meaningful way of relating to God with a set of it questions that can't be answered. In the 1950s, this led him into an argument with the psychoanalyst Carl Jung. He thought Jung had reduced God to a mental state, whereas in fact God was real. If God is just a part of the psyche, he went on, then I-thou is impossible. It simply becomes I. To make matters even more complicated, the reality of God would seem to require his thou-ness to be based in an objective reality, just as I am. But Buber thought that was a false dichotomy. Subjectivism empties God of soul, he says in I and Thou. Objectivism makes him into an object. The latter is a false fixing down, the former a false setting free. I'll leave you to decide whose side you're on. Buber's been enormously influential, leaving his mark on Reinhold Niebuhr, Paul Tillich, and Martin Luther King, amongst others. And the way he divides the world into two fundamental categories is undoubtedly still challenging. I, thou, and I, it. That's essentially how reality manifests. Of course, you might disagree.